I think there's a distinction between talking about the individual as an abstract and the individual as a particular one.
Yes,
the individual as
I
a
agree.
particular one, I completely agree. The individual as an abstract, I mean, I am interested in communicating with particular women, but not with women as individuals. These are not policy statements that I'm interested in. Other members of the PDQ may differ from that. I'm interested in a particular woman's decisions and what kinds of things she should consider. When it comes to an individual, Jane Smith, that's a whole different story.
Yeah, and I think that's really important for us to understand in the hearings. We'll hear the advocates will be really talking about individuals, I think. But as we look at biostatistics, it's confusing to me as a clinician because I'm in the business of looking at whether it's transplantation or large populations to infer down to the patient. And when I read what you said, but when it comes to inferring the benefits of screening, which again, you qualified again, it's screening, clinical observation is fundamentally flawed or subject to flawed interpretation. That's right. And I didn't pick it up either. That's the benefits of mass screening. But when it comes to an individual patient, which is what both patients want and what physicians want, it may not be flawed. Clinical observation may not be flawed because it really does very much determine what goes on with that particular patient, as you said, in that situation. Yeah, I don't want to belabor this, but again, for the broad audience here, I think we have to be very careful in taking biostatistics and saying that basically the observations which are applied to a screening and a statement on policy of screening, when it comes to the individual patient, may not apply. Correct me, just...
I agree.
Okay. I'll stop.
Sure. We have Dr. Harmon Iyer. He has a long career interest in cancer research. He comes to us as an academic career in medical oncology. He has degrees from Utah, Hopkins. He's been recognized from the American College of Surgeons, and we really welcome him to present the views of the American Cancer Society.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman and distinguished members. As Chief Medical Officer of the American Cancer Society, I'm honored to be here today and want to thank you for the opportunity to testify about the strong science supporting the value of mammography in saving lives. The American Cancer Society is the largest community-based health organization dedicated to preventing cancer, saving lives from cancer, and diminishing suffering from cancer. We have established very ambitious goals for the year 2015 to reduce the incidence and death rates of cancer, as well as improve the quality of life of cancer patients. And in order to do that, cancer prevention and early detection is a critical aspect of this strategy. You have heard from Dr. von Eschenbach about the magnitude of the cancer problem, the breast cancer problem, but one fact he didn't give you, which I think is astounding. A woman who dies of breast cancer in America loses 19 years of life due to premature death, as judged by average life expectancy. As a medical oncologist and cancer specialist, I've personally taken care of over 1,000 patients with breast cancer and witnessed the suffering that occurs to patients and their families from breast cancer. And I believe that we are making vast progress in this country, saving thousands of lives from breast cancer, and I hope to not see that reversed. We too would add our encouragement behind the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force recent affirmation of mammography and believe that it adds to the scientific evidence behind it. The scientific evidence supporting mammography in reducing breast cancer death rates is solid. I'd like to share just a few comments about the Society's position on this. Over 100 years ago, it was hypothesized by a French physician that breast cancer began as a single focus, gradually began to spread, went through the lymphatic channels into the vascular channels, resulting in the death of the person. This concept has been verified and gives rise to the notion that if you can find it early enough, surgical removal of the cancer results in cure. It was not until the 1950s, however, that we began to find mammography able to detect early breast cancer, and this gave rise in the 60s, actually, to the HIP study in New York City, which was the first large-scale randomized trial with 62,000 women randomized to mammography and clinical breast exam versus usual care. The result of that study after follow-up was a 30% reduction in death rate in breast cancers in the study group compared to the control group. Before moving on, I'd like to discuss with a little bit of evidence about the data on size and stage of cancer. If you find early disease, no lymph node involvement, no disseminated disease, 5-year survival of breast cancer in America is 97%. In contrast, if you find breast cancer when it's already demonstrated spread, 79% of those women will die in that first 5 years. Our goal is survival, and the scientific evidence has repeatedly demonstrated that screening can help achieve this goal. Following the HIP study, the American Cancer Society and the National Cancer Institute launched a major nationwide demonstration project, the BCDDTP, in which at 10 centers, 280,000 women were screened from 1973 to 1980. And comparing the results of those individuals to the results of the population revealed a substantial reduction in mortality. Subsequent to those trials, there have been studies in Great Britain, in Sweden, and in Canada. Almost all of those studies, except the Canadian studies, have demonstrated a statistically significant reduction in mortality. The Cochrane Group, as you know, has recently criticized these studies. We find their analysis flawed. We don't agree with the fact that those studies had substantial imbalances within them. And in fact, the Cornell Group pointed out in the Malmo study that Senator Harkin referred to, that if you just followed the people longer, there was a significant reduction in mortality, and the Cochrane Group did not even acknowledge that second report. We believe that mammography is not a perfect test. It has flaws. It is an interim effort to help control breast cancer, and as we progress, and we applaud Dr. von Eschenbach's scientific studies, and we are funding scientific studies into finding the answers as to how to prevent cancer, how to block it from occurring, and if it occurs, how to cure it, and it will only be then that we'll get the final control. But in the meantime, mammography is of value in reducing the death rate from breast cancer, and the American Cancer Society applauds and continues to support this effort with information to patients, to women, and with the recommendation that women 40 and over should have annual mammograms. Thank you.
To the American Cancer Society, Dr. Iyer, in your testimony, I want to be clear now. Could you repeat, what are the guidelines of the American Cancer Society for women to have or have not guidelines? What is the American Cancer Society's recommendations and the rationale behind them?
Senator, thank you for the question. Far and away, the most important guideline for breast cancer is that women ages 40 and older who are at average risk should have an annual mammogram combined with a clinical breast exam by their doctor. We also advocate for teaching breast self-examination beginning at age 20, and for women between ages 20 and 40, they should have a clinical breast exam at least every 3 years by their doctor. Those are our screening guidelines for breast cancer.
I just have a few follow-up specific questions. Dr. Berry, in your written testimony, you have a reference to the audit of the Swedish trials, and you have a parenthetical statement, hopefully the recently announced NCI guidelines will not lead to the Swedes withdrawing this offer. Could you explain what that means?